this can feel difficult. So let's talk about first how to get over that scary feeling of jumping in with our watercolours. So these Tobermory houses are so bright and bold that they are begging for some loose, direct watercolours. That is, popping the watercolours straight on the page before we start thinking about structure, before we start adding ink. And that sounds scary. Certainly sounds a bit scary to me, that's for sure. You never quite know what's going to happen when you just go straight in with your watercolours, when you make it loose, when you do wet on wet techniques. But if we break down the processes, if we think it through logically, if we trust what's going to happen, and we know that our processes are sound, then we end up with something interesting. The theme today, or the idea which we sort of bring together at the end, is that when we are loose, we need to lose the idea that what we're doing is painting something perfectly. Instead, what we're doing is we're taking a scene, be that a photo or the scene in front of us, and we are getting its essence and then responding to what happens on our page. So we're not just going, well, this house is this big and this colour. We're also going, well, I tried to paint it this big and this colour, but it's now decided it's going to be a little bit of a different colour and the watercolours run a bit. So I'm going to change it and I'm going to make it fit my image. I'm going to make my image art based on a scene instead of art which is exactly that scene. So I hope that makes sense, but think of that as we go through. And what we're producing at the end is something like this fun, bright, bold sketch with a lot of shape, a lot of loose structure and a lot of character. As ever, if you enjoy this, please do like and subscribe. But more importantly, if you have thoughts about it, about the process, you enjoy it, or you think that there's something wrong or something which should have been done differently or could have been done differently, please leave me a comment. I love hearing comments. I love hearing comments, especially where they teach me something or show me a different perspective. So let me know down below if there's something that you might have changed, manipulated, or just wanted to do differently. So let's have a look first at the supplies we're going to be using. We've got just a normal watercolour sketchbook. This one's by Handmuller. It's actually really nice. It's cotton paper and it's 5.5 by 5.5 inches. But we're going to be using it as a landscape book. We're going to be opening it out, and to do that, got a couple of clips. And like that, we could be inside or outside. And actually, it's really easy just to hold the book open, no problems at all. So that's our sketchbook. That's our surface. And the next thing we need is a brush. So this is a 13mm or 1/2 inch angled brush. And with direct watercolours, we go straight in. And for me, it's easiest with a flat brush to create clear shapes. So a flat brush and angled brush, very similar thing. And that's what we're going to be using to go along with our watercolours. Now, our watercolours are all listed on urbansketch.co.uk. If you check out the supplies tab, you can see exactly what's in my current palette, as well as previous palettes. I explain why I have or don't have certain colours in my palette still. But I'll also let you know as I use colours what I'm using today. And then we've got a couple of pens. We're actually going to be using this pen. So this is a Twibsy Diamond 580. And I've got waterproof ink in. Now we're going to be using that at the end because we are doing direct watercolours. So direct watercolours is where we go straight on the page. We've got this blank page and we're just going to jump in with our watercolours. Nothing else, no sort of pencil marks, nothing. Now, this can feel difficult. So let's talk about first how to get over that scary feeling of jumping in with our watercolours, or even if we're just jumping with our ink. Basically, how do we set up our sketch? How do we set ourselves up for success? Well, one thing I often talk about is doing a thumbnail. And what's a thumbnail sketch? It's where we take a little cube or square of our page and we do something really basic, really quick. And I'm not going to do one of those today, but you can see here a couple of examples. And literally, it's a study in something about the scenes. It might be a study in the proportions. It might be a study in the layout. It might be a study in the colours. So option number one is thumbnails. But if we don't want to do that, and fair enough, sometimes we just want to get straight in, don't we? If we don't want to do that, there's actually a really simple technique that we can use just to get our eye in and work out how we're going to lay out our scene. And what do? We just take our brush, maybe maybe we had a couple of brushes, or maybe we use our brush and our pen, and we lay out the scene. So we can see here, we've got this foreground. Now I'm going to cut that foreground out. I don't think it adds a huge amount. It's great for the photo, but I think in terms of sketching in little details of rope and things like that, it's not going to add a huge amount, at least not in my style. Feel free to disagree and do your own thing. But for me, I'm cutting that out. So what I've got is my brush here, and that's going to be the sort of shoreline, if you like. Now we can just take our pen, and we can map out the curve, just really roughly, we can map out the curve of that grass. And if we want, we could take another pen and we could go and look, there's the sort of the hillside at the back. And now we can visualize it. We can just visualize really simply, really easily, how are things going to fit together. And that's all we need. When we've got that basic structure, as long as we're approximately correct, or we're taking hints from the scene in front of us, we won't need more than that. And we can be really loose. We can be really, really loose. So with that in mind, let's be really loose. So what are we doing for this process? Well, we're doing what's normally about 4 steps to go from blank to fun, blank to fantastic. And along the way, hopefully, occasional bits of stress, but mostly that kind of fun stress. So the first step, step 1, just wet our brush. What I'm actually going to do this time, the brush is a bit dirty there. Clean my brush off properly, and I've got a towel I keep off to one side so I can keep it dry. And what we're going to do is sort of get the houses actually marked in water first, so we can kind of just get the idea of where are these shapes going to be. Actually quite handy that my brush is a little bit dirty, because it means you can really easily see where my shapes are. And what we've got sort of a little house off to the side. We've got the pink house going to the blue, going to that red and navy house. And then we've got another little shape here, which is all these other ones together. And that's our houses. So now that we've got them mapped in, we can just go and just touch in the colours. So what have we got? The key colours are this kind of bright yellow down here. So that's wonderful. Then we've got this pinky colour. So I'm not going to be too fussed about being exact about what we need. So instead of mixing, I'm just going to take the nearest thing in my palette. And for me, that's going to be a bit of Perylene Violet. And I know that's not the right colour, but that's what I'm using. Then we've got these houses here, which have got 2 tones. So across the top, I would say that's quite an indigo. It's like a navy blue, but the closest thing for me, indigo. An ultramarine might work quite well. And we could just come across and look, we can get those shapes in. And underneath we've got a lighter blue, so let's go with cobalt blue. And that's just going to blend and merge up. And then a bit further on still, we've got a nice red, sort of deep red, but I'm going to go with Scarlet Lake. And look, it's just going to blend with that indigo and become quite a deep red anyway. Moving along another bit, we've got what is a punchy red. So same red, because we're keeping things simple. And we just pop in that shape. Into the yellow, into a lovely blue. And again, to keep things simple, to keep the number of colours down, I'm just going to use the same blue. And it's got a little shape going up as well. So that, believe it or not, that's our houses. Not finished, but started. And now we can start building the other parts of the scene around it. So what have we got in front of them? We've got this kind of concrete, I don't know what to call it, facade of the edge of the beach. So I'm going to do that in, actually, let's keep it simple. The rule is generally try to avoid using more than 6 or 7 pigments. So I was about to take another one and another one, but I've already used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I don't want to go too mad here. So I'm going to limit myself here. I'm going to use a brown. I've got a sepia, which is a nice neutral brown. Well, neutral, it's a nice deep brown at least. Not really neutral. It's quite it's got quite a tone to it. It's got quite a sort of cool tone, I would say. Although I'm also prone to getting these things wrong and having my own opinions. But let's see what happens if we just add that in. And all it is, it's a long thin shape, isn't it? So we can just add that in. And look, I don't want it to connect in every place, but I want it to connect in a few places so that we get this blending. Look, we've got some yellow blending, no red blending, then we've got red, blue blending in. And we take it all the way along, and we get to this kind of pier that's coming out. And there you go, that is our shape. And then what else have we got? Well, above we've got this lovely greenery. So instead of adding in another pigment, what we can do, we can take our cobalt blue that we were using, we can take our Hansa yellow that we've already used, we can make a nice just neutral green. Now by mixing that with more blue, we'll get a deeper green, more yellow, we'll get a lighter green, and with the brown we'll be able to change it to, you know, another kind of more murky green. And all we can do now is just come in and start finding loose shapes, loose approximate shapes within this greenery, and just varying that wash, just a little bit more yellow, a little bit more blue, a little bit of brown. And what we're going to do is end up with a really lovely varied wash when we're finished. And by painting nice and wet, everything's just blending and merging nicely together. Remember, this is painting the light colours, so we're not fussed that things are blending and merging, and you know there's supposed to be dark roofs and all this, because we can add them on top. We can easily add them on top. We can't add light on top. Light is lost as soon as there's dark. Then what else is left? Well, we've got this kind of other shape that we mapped out just in the background. We could do that really faintly. So that's our scene, and it's not looking like much. But that's the end of step one. That's our main features of the scene. And what we can do now is actually jump straight into step two. Step two is where we fill in the surroundings. So what have we got? We've got that punchy blue sky. So I'm going to take loads of cobalt, loads of water, and we're going to just create this sky. Now this sky does not have to fill this whole area. In fact, I'd argue to avoid filling the whole area, to provide plenty of light and white space on our page as well. Also, this new layer, this new bit doesn't have to stay separate from these trees. It can blend and merge, and that just leaves us more flexible, leaves us being able to change things more in the future, you know, with our next layers. Oh, I've done it again. I've automatically taken another colour, but let's go back, let's be sensible. I'm going to take some indigo now, and what we're going to be doing is just producing these reflections down below. So do you see how closest to the houses, closest to this wall, we've got quite a deep shadow, so we just pop in some indigo. And then underneath it we've got quite striking reflections of all these houses. We can just do that with shapes. And we're inventing some of them, you know, we've used our red, so we're going to reuse our red. We've used our blue here, so we're going to reuse our blue. Perlin violet, reuse our perlin violet. What we're doing is we're taking a feature of the scene and we're exaggerating what's really there, which is fine. We're exaggerating to make a point of the colours of these houses. These reflections are there in the pink, they're there in the red. They're not really there here, but we can invent them. We can have them be there anyway. Then a bit more of this kind of dark. This is a mix of indigo and sepia. And just by touching this stuff in here, what we'll do is produce just the idea of a sea, especially when we come back shortly with our other layers. And there you go. So that is us done. Step one, step two. And what does it look like? It looks like a hot mess. It looks absolutely manic. And it looks like there is no way that we could possibly make something good out of this. But we will. Alas, we will. So we need to wait for this to dry, probably 10 minutes. So let's go have a coffee, or maybe a whiskey, depending on the end of the day that you're at. And we'll come back and add in a little bit more of the fun colours. And look, we are now back, and we are mostly dry, not entirely dry, but mostly dry, and that's all we need to be. And what we're going to do now is start suggesting some details and suggesting some bold colours in a way that fits with this very loose colour we've got on top. So what's the first thing to start doing? It's kind of unpicking the flaws of the houses, isn't it? So I'm going to start again with our lovely bold colours. So I've got my Hansa yellow. What we do, we just pop in that Hansa yellow block in that front of this front house, and then we can move along and just repeat this same process, just being a little neater now, a little less wet on wet and a little more sort of careful with the colours we're applying. And what we can do just by being careful with our shape is we'll find we can just build in our simple houses, our simple lovely colours, our bold colours, but it's on top of such a loose and fascinating wash that it can't help but be interesting, despite the fact that it's really simple in sort of conception, simple in how it's been put together. So what we're trying to do is basically pop down a higher saturation, higher intensity of colour. We're getting higher values as well from our colours. Can then move along. So what we've got underneath, we've got this lovely blue. And again, it doesn't really matter if they come together or if we keep them separate, these new colours. But we just don't want it quite as loose. Loose, but not quite as loose. Now this red I'm going to mix in with my indigo. And by doing that, I can just create a different side. So now we've got this kind of punchy red and this less punchy red on one side. And that gives us two different sides to our image. Now, of course, you might notice that because I was talking and waffling and not thinking too cleverly about it, I've got rid of my yellow house. Not a problem, you know. Let's see if I can rescue it by popping in a little bit of yellow. And I can to some extent. So let's call that rescued. We'll see what happens at the end. Really what I should have done is paid more attention and kept my red shape smaller. But you know, it's not ruined, it's just slightly different from what I was planning. Next, our blue comes in about here. And you can see that's got a bit mucky as well. But there we go. So now we've got that kind of blue shape at the end. Now we need to add in those roofs that we're talking about. So let's get some nice indigo and a bit of sepia. So the indigo and the sepia together should produce quite a deep dark pigment, not something that we've got there already. And with that deep dark pigment, suddenly we'll be able to just produce simple roof shapes, simple roofs on top of our wall shapes, if you like. So you know, it's all just shapes, isn't it? All these roofs are is little sort of rectangles basically sticking on the top of our houses. And that's pretty much good enough. We can come in with that same colour now that we've got it out and just reintroduce some of these dark lines we want down in the sea, maybe a couple of little moving lines of waves in the sea as well. And then, believe it or not, we're going to keep using this kind of moody dark colour to just suggest some windows. So we can come in using the tip. We could use a smaller brush. We could use the tip here of our flat or angled brush, whatever you happen to be using. And within these little splodges of colour, we can just begin introducing a few window shapes, kind of door shapes. These things are going to float away, especially where it's wet, and that's fine. It's part of the fun. It's part of the mystery of this kind of style of painting. The fact that it's loose, wet and wet. You're not really totally controlling at any time what's going on and what's going to happen. And there we go, just little drops in, and we've got these suggestions of windows all along. We can then also start building in things like the outlines of houses. So we can start just suggesting here. We've got this shadow down this side, shadow down here, shadow down here, under there. Okay, and then we've got our greens, of course. So let's come back in with our blue, our yellow. And this time what we're after is just really punchy greens, really something punchy to add a bit more shape to these, these shapes that we already created. So what I'm going to do now is just apply this different sort of greens throughout here and create that kind of feel of 3D-ness. We might even add some of these trees you see sort of poking out. We can just add those in at the top as well. And don't forget to keep changing that so we don't get something too monotonic, single effect going on in our sky. And then a couple of bits to just suggest in there. We've got a little house up here, haven't we? And then we've got another house poking its head just up here. And they can just be little touches of colour which we can refine when we come to adding our pen. What else have we got? We've got all these boats and things, and you know what? This scene's about these houses, so I'm actually just going to leave the boats out, and I think that'll be good enough. But what I am going to do is just clean my brush off, and then a few of these shapes, just soften them. So where it looks a bit like geometric, a bit too controlled perhaps, we can just soften, blend, move. And what we're going to do with our pen is we'll recapture some of these details, we'll recapture a few bits. Just found this as well. As we move around, you always just find bits which you feel you could have done more with. You left out a bit too much. So we can come in and find those bits, basically. We could reflect some of these greens in the sea as well, because why not? There would be greens reflecting. We've made such a feature of these reflections already. And there you go. That is, again, really quick. Step 3 done. Hopefully you can see now this is really coming together. It's got bold shapes. Very simple shapes. it's very abstract at the moment. And we could leave it at this. This is, for me, I'm a bit odd, of course, but for me, this is quite fun already. This is a really fascinating little study in, what we talked about studies, didn't we, the thumbnails. This is a study in colour and simplicity, this. But we can take it another step further. What we do is we come back with a pen. Now, often I'll come back in with something like this, a feud pen with a brush nib or a brush pen or something like that. But today we're going to just use my normal sketching pen. So this is my Twibsy or Twispy, I really don't know how to say it, with my normal carbon black ink. We're going to see how just using a normal sketching pen with this technique will produce some really fascinating and fun results. So it's only really when things have dried that we can add the pen in, but it's also when things have dried that we start to think, you know what, I can really see what I'm working with here. And look, now that it's dried, you can see it's got a lot of structure already. It's already a really fun, interesting image. And what we're going to do, we're just going to react. So, you know, I always call these stages something different, but fundamentally, whether it's a 3, 4, 5-step process that I say I'm using this time, it's all about reacting to what happens. Those watercolours will do things and we will respond. And that is what we're doing now. So we want to respond to all these different things that watercolours have done, whilst keeping in mind the scene in front of us. So what do I mean? Well, let's just play around and find out. So we're going to look at our scene and we're going to find the shapes in our scene. And you can see things like this roof line which go up. And then we can see that in this scene we've got this sort of 2 layers to this shop. And so we are looking at our scene, but we're also looking at our watercolours. Look, there's a nice square of watercolour. So instead of trying to go exactly, you know, maybe this should be a little bit narrower. Instead of doing that, we go, you know what? That's how our watercolours have gone. So that's the shape we're going to make with our pen. Similarly, we've got a doorway here. Well, the doorway is going to go around this wet on wet watercolour splodge. And we don't need to be clever. We don't need to try and force things. We just let the watercolours do their thing and design a bit of our drawing for us. Similarly here, we just find the top of that roof that we added in. And then there, we're going along again. We can add in, like chimneys. We didn't do much in the way of chimneys in our initial sketch. We can add them in now. And we find these key shapes. Got these windows that we can come along. We can move and manipulate them because they're so loose. And then we got this next rooftop. Little window, door. And you see, so we're just going along, linking everything up, finding those key shapes. Now some things are connected, so we just keep our line going. And here we've got another shape to find. We go around this part of the roof, then we've got another shape here. And it's all sort of right. It's all sort of right because we've based our initial watercolour shapes on the scene, but it's also done its own thing because it's watercolours. It's been loose and it's moved and flipped and flopped around. Come here, we can get our nice chimney here. And look, we did rescue this a bit. We rescued this. We can see blue, yellow, red. So brilliant. What we can do is we can find where our shape ended up. And now we've got these 3 houses. And yeah, look, I've graduated them not quite right, and that's fine. So we've still got the idea of these 3 houses, the colours moving along them. You can start adding in some more windows again. We can do little windows along here. Same here. We don't have to do every detail though, so we can leave lots out. Come back and let's just rejoin and start finding these windows. And again, I mean, if you're watching this, you probably, on average, most people who watch my videos have seen one of my videos before. So you've probably seen my kind of style, and it's all about just being loose, and we're not worrying too much about the details. What we're doing is we're having a bit of fun and getting our version of our image down on this page. So we're just moving along and finding, what do we want to add in? How many windows do we want to in? What doors do we want to add in? What just fits, and what don't we feel like? Now a key part is going to be getting this wall nice and sort of solid, because it's a real solid part of our image. It holds it all together. Comes out to this pier, which we can get some of these kind of shapes in as well. And it's all just, the whole idea of the scene just comes from the shape that we initially drew, or not drew, but laid out with our pens. And that is based on this sort of pier, this this wall. Now we get to the very fluid bit, don't we, in the back. What I'm going to start with, though, is finding... Remember we sort of came and added these houses. And these houses are, amongst all the wilderness, these houses are geometric shapes. So we'll find these houses, can find the windows, and we just use very similar patterns as we use elsewhere. Now, apologies if you can hear my dog getting overexcited in the background. We rescued a dog just a few days ago, and she settled in amazingly well. She's just getting used to having 20 minutes on her own, and she's doing amazingly well, but she's occasionally a little bit hyper. Anyway, back to sketching. So what are we going to do? We are going to come in and find our tree shapes. And our tree shapes can be really simple. They don't have to be, but for me, I love these simple swirls. Why do I love these simple swirls? Because it's so obviously different from what's gone on down here. It's so obviously contrasting with our angularity of all of these houses. Also because it's about right, you know. Trees are often quite spherical, so, you know, I'm not just inventing it, I'm also basing it, I'm simplifying it hugely, but basing it on reality. And then we can just get these swirls coming. They're also just, they're flowing, they're fluid, they move around. They're really, really easy to add in. So as we swirl and loop sort of all around the page, we're suddenly building up this difference, this very natural versus very angular kind of set of spaces. And what can we do next? What can we do next? Well, we can continue building up a little more detail if we want. We could actually probably call this done if we wanted, but what I'm going to do, just a little bit more, finding like a few of these windows, for example, adding a few examples of texture. Maybe this wall needs a little bit more texture, a little bit more something going on. And then we've got all this lovely sea. So in this sea, we can suggest these reflections a little bit more by doing these wavy lines coming towards us between those areas of reflection, which just suggests more of this sort of area coming towards us. Those reflections, that light, all flowing towards us. A few sort of waves. Remember, we've got all these lovely wave shapes already in the sea. We can get those in. And then last bit of structure to come into this background here. And is there anything else? Well, look, there's always more and more that you could keep just going at and going at. But at some point you've got to stop and you've got to say, you know what, my lovely loose image is done. So this is going to be my lovely loose image done, for better or for worse. And these are the houses of Tobermory, done in a sort of direct watercolour style. And I'd encourage you just to have a go. I know this is a difficult style to feel is okay because it takes so long. You spend stage 1, 2, 3, and it's not until that's dried that you start to understand, maybe I've got something okay here. Maybe this is actually going to look okay. And I think this has come out really well. So have a go yourself. Do share with me on social media your sort of finished sketch. If you enjoy my stuff, like, subscribe. It's a huge support. Most importantly, though, have fun and be creative. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel because it makes me really, really happy. Thanks again.